Hello, all you freedom-loving people. Grassley highlighted that there were 10,000 plus migrant children who were handed over to unvetted sponsors. The DOJ will release Epstein files this week. U.S. warships were deployed near Venezuela to combat drug cartels, and over 460 arrests have been made so far in D.C. Okay, let's get into it. Today, during the press briefing, White House Press Secretary Caroline Leavitt announced that police and federal officers have made 465 arrests since the federal government took over the police department in Washington, D.C.
President Trump's efforts to make D.C. safe again are working. There have been a total of 465 arrests since the start of this operation on Thursday, August 7th. Last night, there were a total of 52 arrests, including the arrest of an illegal alien MS-13 gang member with convictions for DWI and drug possession. Thanks to President Trump's leadership and the outstanding work of both federal and local law enforcement, dangerous gang members like the one picked up last night will not be allowed on the streets of our nation's capital. Other arrests last night included assault with a deadly weapon for stabbing, parole violation for robbery, murder, outstanding warrant for attempted murder, assault on federal law enforcement officer, and felony assault. 4 more homeless encampments were also removed during yesterday's reporting period. To date, a total of 48 homeless encampments have been cleared in Washington, D.C. by multi-agency teams. MPD patrol units are actively working with city officials to locate and clear additional encampments and remove homeless residents off of Washington's streets.
Today, Attorney General Pam Bondi also posted similar statistics on X. Bondi also said that residents and visitors both welcome the efforts of D.C. and federal law enforcement partners, but D.C. Attorney General Brian Schwab recently stated that the actions of the administration were unnecessary and that no crime emergency exists in the District of Columbia. This is while the Washington Post reported today that the Justice Department is investigating whether the D.C. Metropolitan Police Department, the MPD, manipulated crime data to make crime rates appear lower. The investigation is being run by the office of Janine Pirro, who is now an attorney for D.C. In the meantime, yesterday, governors from Mississippi, Tennessee, and Louisiana promised to send National Guard troops and assist the Trump administration in D.C. Yesterday, Senate Judiciary Chairman Chuck Grassley released new data from the Department of Health and Human Services, the HHS. Based on HHS data, from January 2021 to January 2025, the HHS Office of Refugee Resettlement put 11,488 unaccompanied migrant children into the hands of unvetted sponsors. Those unvetted sponsors were not parents or guardians, and they were not fingerprinted, nor did they complete a background check. During that same period, the HHS also declined to conduct home studies for over 79,000 migrant children under the age of 12. The studies allow caseworkers to corroborate background information about the sponsor and to assess the ability of the sponsor to provide for the basic needs of the child. Reportedly, HHS, under the Biden administration, spent $22.5 billion on assistance for illegal migrants. Of this, $12.6 billion of the funds went to resettle migrants through the Office of Refugee Resettlement. But it seems that the funds did not prevent the DHS and the HHS from losing track of thousands of migrant children under the previous administration. The Trump administration provided information to Grassley as part of his oversight investigation and requests. Since February, the Trump administration has moved to reform the unaccompanied minor program. This includes launching an interagency initiative and investigation into suspected fraud and child trafficking in the program. Yesterday, House Oversight Chairman James Comer announced that the Justice Department plans to start releasing Jeffrey Epstein-related records on Friday. Comer subpoenaed the Department of Justice and others earlier this month for any documents and testimony about Epstein. Comer gave the Justice Department until August 19th in a letter to Attorney General Pam Bondi. Comer said in a statement, "Officials with the Department of Justice have informed us that the department will begin to provide Epstein-related records to the Oversight Committee this week on Friday. Comer also said that there are many records in DOJ's custody, and it will take the department time to produce all the records and ensure the identification of victims and any child sex abuse material are redacted. Comer made the announcement while former Attorney General Bill Barr appeared on Capitol Hill yesterday for a deposition on the Epstein case. Barr was the first witness to testify before the Oversight Committee about the Epstein case. Comer told reporters that Barr had testified that Epstein died by suicide, and that Barr was angry to learn of the Metropolitan Correctional Center's failure to adequately secure this prisoner. Comer also said that Barr testified that he had never seen anything that would implicate President Trump in any of this. Comer added that Barr testified that he never had conversations with President Trump pertaining to a client list. He didn't know anything about a client list. He believed that if there had been anything pertaining to President Trump with respect to the Epstein list, that he felt like the Biden administration would have probably leaked it out. Yesterday, the Director of National Intelligence, Tulsi Gabbard, said that the UK government had agreed to drop its request that Apple provides it with backdoor access to user data. Gabbard stated on X that the agreement came after months of working with UK partners alongside President Trump and Vice President J.D. Vance to ensure that private data of Americans and civil liberties are protected. Earlier this year, reports emerged that the UK government had issued Apple a technical capability notice. And with that notice, the UK government required Apple to provide access to encrypted user data under the Investigatory Powers Act of 2016. In response, Apple halted its Advanced Data Protection (ADP) feature for UK users because of concerns about data breaches. The ADP feature provides end-to-end encryption for iCloud storage, and it prevents non-account holders, including governments and hackers, from accessing data such as photos, documents, and notes. Without ADP, certain types of iCloud data would no longer be fully encrypted, which would make it potentially accessible to third parties with the proper legal authority. Apple stated at the time that it remains committed to offering our users the highest level of security for their personal data, and we are hopeful that we will be able to do so in the future in the United Kingdom. Then in May, House Judiciary Committee Chairman Jim Jordan and House Foreign Affairs Committee Chair Brian Mast sent a letter to UK Home Secretary Yvette Cooper, and they urged her to allow Apple to disclose the existence of the order to the Department of Justice so the department could assess whether the order complies with a US-UK bilateral agreement under the Cloud Act. The Cloud Act prohibits orders that require companies to decrypt data. According to the letter, the U.S. companies are prohibited under UK law from disclosing or from confirming the existence of such an order. Doing so constitutes a criminal offense, even if the disclosure is made to the company's home government. Jordan and Mast warned that the UK order for Apple to create a backdoor could have implications since it might be exploited by cybercriminals and authoritarian regimes. Yesterday, Reuters reported that the U.S. will send 3 Aegis guided missile destroyers to the waters off Venezuela in the next 36 hours to address drug cartels. The ships are USS Gravely, USS Jason Dunham, and USS Sampson. And along with 4,000 sailors and Marines in the southern Caribbean region, several P-8 spy planes, warships, and at least 1 attack submarine will be deployed. Reportedly, the personnel and military assets would operate in international airspace and waters for several months, and besides intelligence and surveillance operations, the naval assets could be used to launch a targeted strike. But yesterday, Venezuelan President Nicolas Maduro, who spoke at an event with political allies, said that his government defends sovereign territory and that no one would touch the nation's land. Maduro also vowed to mobilize more than 4 million militia fighters. Yesterday, in a televised address, Maduro said, "This week, I will activate a special plan with more than 4.5 million militiamen to ensure coverage of the entire national territory, militias that are prepared, activated, and armed." Venezuelan Interior Minister also said that we are also deployed throughout the Caribbean in our sea, our property, Venezuelan territory. Recently, the Trump administration doubled its reward for arresting Maduro to $50 million. It accuses Maduro of leading a cocaine smuggling network known as the Cartel de los Soles. The United States had not recognized Maduro's last 2 election victories, and they recently imposed new sanctions on both the Maduro administration and the alleged cartel. Regardless of the outcome, the meeting between President Trump and Russian President Putin in Alaska has changed the world landscape. Besides the EU, the one most concerned about the U.S.-Russia talks is the Chinese Communist Party. The EU is happy to see the meeting succeed, while the CCP would have been happy to see it fail. After the Alaska talks, both the U.S. and Russia described the talks as productive. President Trump praised the talks as very productive, and Russian President Putin said that the meeting will be the starting point for resolving the Ukraine conflict and restoring Russian-U.S. relations. This should not be considered mere polite talk between the two leaders. Kirill Dmitriev, the Russian presidential envoy for foreign investment and economic cooperation, who accompanied Putin on the trip, said the talks between Putin and Trump were surprisingly good. However, official Chinese Communist Party reports were pessimistic, stating that the talks had made progress but reached no agreement, and they were grand in scale but full of intrigue. The CCP are deliberately downplaying the results. This is understandable, as they fear that once the war ends, the U.S. will shift its focus to Beijing. The Wall Street Journal stated that in the past several months, there's some reason to think that President Trump is hunting a larger diplomatic breakthrough to pull China from supporting Russia. China and Russia, one with vast territory and the other with a large population, would be a formidable enemy of the free world if they join forces. While they are currently allies, their ties are not without their differences. Dismantling the Sino-Russia alliance has always been one of the goals of the Trump team, especially since President Trump hasn't been able to negotiate an end to the Russia-Ukraine war for a couple of months. So the importance and urgency of dismantling the Sino-Russia alliance has greatly increased. Part of the message that Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent brought to Sweden in July to CCP officers was that a secondary sanctions bill was pending in the Senate. That bill would impose tariffs of up to 500% on countries that support Russia's war machine by buying its oil and gas. At the same time, President Trump is also making diplomatic gestures to Beijing that suggest a desire for détente. President Trump lifted the ban on the sale of advanced computer chips to China, specifically NVIDIA's H20 chip, in an effort to soften the tightness of the relationship with Beijing. Releasing the ban on NVIDIA's H20 chip was a top Beijing trade request. Also, Taiwanese President Lai Ching-te didn't stop in the U.S. on his way to a planned visit to Latin America. This was because Beijing had protested to Washington, and the Trump administration had rejected Lai Ching-te's application to transit through New York on his way to Central America. Even the Biden administration allowed Taiwan's president to make a stopover in the U.S. despite China's typical loud opposition. However, many experts on Taiwan's issues believe that this is the result of the Taiwanese government's failure to respond effectively to American strategic shifts after President Trump's return to the White House in this post-globalization era. Christian Whitten, a U.S. national security expert and former advisor to President Trump, wrote an article titled "How Taiwan Lost Trump." The article states that on the day President Trump was re-elected president last year, Taiwan's diplomatic strategy error became apparent. Lai Ching-te did not call President Trump to congratulate him. Wynne believes that this is a problem in and of itself. These advisors provided poor advice, perhaps because they lacked real access to President Trump. Lai should have exercised his own judgment, though, and let President Trump decide whether to accept a congratulatory call. It is clear that President Trump hopes that this combination of carrots and sticks will stabilize the Chinese Communist Party before the end of the Russia-Ukraine war, so that the CCP will not dare to openly support Moscow. On the other hand, President Trump has also put pressure on Russia. Why was Putin willing to sit down at the negotiating table? This is because President Trump pressed him step by step. The best way to prevent war is to cut off the other side's financial resources. President Trump did two things. First, President Trump signed a trade agreement with the EU. The EU agreed to purchase nearly $1 trillion worth of U.S. oil, directly capturing funds that would have otherwise flowed to Russia. Second, he prohibited India from purchasing Russian oil. If India does not comply, then a 50% tariff will be imposed on Indian goods that are exported to the United States. At the same time, it's also necessary to demonstrate American and its allies' military strength, including future capabilities. At President Trump's urging, most NATO countries have now agreed to increase their military spending from 2% to 5% of their GDP. When welcoming President Putin, President Trump did not forget to seize the opportunity to show off America's advanced weapons. He forced President Putin and his motorcade to drive past a huge lineup of F-22s and attack helicopters on his way to the meeting. At the same time, a B-2 stealth bomber flew over Putin's head as President Trump applauded. Regardless of whether the Alaska summit between Putin and Trump will help end the war in Ukraine, it has already signaled a reshaping of the global strategic landscape. During his visit to Europe in July, Chinese Foreign Minister Wang Yi told the EU's top diplomat that Beijing could not afford to see Russia fail in the Ukraine war. In contrast, Putin does not view relations with Beijing as being so important. President Putin was willing to meet with President Trump, indicating that he's willing to improve relations with the United States. Otherwise, he would not have mentioned the 2020 election to President Trump. And among the leaders of the world's major powers, Putin is one of the few who has taken a clear stance on this issue. At a press conference following the talks, Putin mentioned that mutual cooperation between the U.S. and Russia in the Arctic is realistic, and that Russia and the U.S. can offer each other a lot in terms of trade, energy, technology, and space exploration. This means that if Russia-U.S. relations improve, then China-Russia cooperation may face uncertainty, and Beijing will feel more isolated on the international stage. But the CCP will not sit idly by and wait for disaster to strike. The Chinese Communist Party quickly began to court India. The principle espoused by the Chinese Communist Party is the enemy of my enemy is my friend. India has also been targeted by President Trump in this round of tariffs, and Wang Yi is visiting India starting on Sunday, and he's expected to stay for 3 days. And on Tuesday, Modi met with Wang Yi at his residence in New Delhi. This is the first visit to India by a Chinese foreign minister in more than 3 years. Indian Prime Minister Modi has also announced that he will visit Beijing at the end of August. On the other hand, the U.S. trade negotiators' planned visit to India from the 25th to the 29th has been canceled, and negotiations on the U.S.-India bilateral trade agreement will be postponed. The Chinese Communist Party has also begun to find fault with the H-20 chip. The Chinese Communist Party used its media outlets to publish articles claiming that NVIDIA's H-20 chip is fully capable of remote shutdown functionality, including setting voltage and timing conditions to automatically shut down the chip. The article also stated that the H-20 chip is neither environmentally friendly, advanced, nor safe, and they encouraged Chinese manufacturers not to purchase these chips. NVIDIA responded by stating that cybersecurity is of paramount importance to NVIDIA. NVIDIA chips do not contain backdoors and will not allow anyone to remotely access or control the chips. In fact, the H20 chip was previously banned from export to China by the Trump administration on national security grounds. The lifting of the ban this time is due to progress in trade negotiations between China and the U.S. China has recently agreed to supply rare earth magnets, and Washington is also willing to release some chip exports. Behind the Chinese Communist Party's sudden change of face, Su Zhiyun, the director of the Strategic and Resource Institute at the Taiwan Institute for National Defense and Security Research, believes that Beijing should use the H20 as a bargaining chip in hopes of gaining more in future trade negotiations. There is another possibility, which is that Beijing hopes to use NVIDIA CEO Jensen Huang as a messenger between Beijing and the White House. Previously, Beijing had hoped that Elon Musk would play this role, but now that is definitely not possible. The H20 chip is tailor-made by NVIDIA specifically for the Chinese market. Chinese AI companies such as DeepSeek and Alibaba Cloud have previously had significant demand for the H20, and Jensen Huang definitely does not want to lose the Chinese market. The fact that Jensen Huang was able to persuade the Trump administration to lift the export ban on H20 chips shows that he has good connections in the White House and he knows how to communicate with the Trump team. This is exactly the kind of person Beijing is looking for. Experts believe that an important indicator for observing the future direction of China-Russia-U.S. relations is whether Putin will attend the military parade in Beijing on September 3rd as scheduled. And that's a wrap for this episode. Thank you so much for your support of Front Page. Please remember to leave a comment below the video. This is really helping us to be seen all around the world. The more people who watch Front Page, the more freedom-loving people the world will have. And please hit the like button and hit the notification bell after subscribing. And please share this video with your friends and family because everybody deserves to know the truth.